Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow as he adjusted the scope on his rifle, the morning sun casting long shadows across the makeshift walls of Haven Ridge. The settlement had become home to 47 souls over the past 2 years, a sanctuary carved from the ruins of what was once a thriving mountain community. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the central courtyard where Amy Miller was teaching the younger ones how to identify edible plants, a skill that had kept them alive when rations ran low. But today felt different. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts during his 15 years as a military sergeant, and every fiber of his being screamed that danger was approaching. He descended from the watchtower, his boots crunching on the gravel path that wound between the converted shipping containers they called home. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her makeshift laboratory where she'd been working tirelessly on what she called Project Genesis, her attempt to understand and potentially reverse the zombie virus that had claimed 90% of humanity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and the exhaustion in her eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights spent hunched over microscopes and test tubes. "Any progress?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from her frustrated expression. Elena shook her head, gesturing at the blood samples spread across her workstation. "I'm close, Marcus. I can feel it. The virus has a pattern, a weakness, but I need more time." Time was the one resource they could never seem to find enough of in this new world. Jake Morrison emerged from beneath the hood of their armored transport, his face streaked with oil and determination. The former auto shop owner had become their mechanical wizard, keeping their vehicles running with nothing but spare parts and pure ingenuity. "She's purring like a kitten now," he announced proudly, patting the reinforced bumper of the truck they'd nicknamed the Beast. Jake's optimism was infectious, even in the darkest moments, and Marcus found himself almost smiling despite the growing unease in his chest. The radio crackled to life from the communications center, where Rebecca Walsh was monitoring emergency frequencies. The former police officer had taken charge of their security and communications, her sharp blue eyes always scanning for threats. "Marcus, you need to hear this," she called out, her voice tight with concern. Tommy Garcia burst through the main gate at that moment, his chest heaving from running. At 17, Tommy had become their best scout, able to move through zombie territory with a stealth that amazed even Marcus. But now the teenager's face was pale with terror. "Sir, we've got problems," Tommy gasped, accepting a water bottle from one of the other survivors. "Big problems. There's a horde moving in from the eastern valley." Marcus felt his blood run cold. They'd dealt with small groups of zombies before, maybe 20 or 30 at a time, but a horde was something else entirely. "How many?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Tommy's hands shook as he pulled out a pair of binoculars. "I climbed the old cell tower about 10 miles out. Marcus, I've never seen anything like it. Thousands. Maybe 10,000. They're moving in a straight line, like they know exactly where they're going." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. In the 2 years since the outbreak, zombies had shown basic pack behavior, but this sounded organized, purposeful. Elena dropped her test tube, the glass shattering on the concrete floor. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The virus damages the higher brain functions. They can't coordinate on that scale." Rebecca emerged from the communications center, her face grim. "I've been monitoring military frequencies all morning. There's chatter about anomalous zombie behavior from settlements as far as Colorado and Utah. Something's changing out there." Marcus gathered his thoughts, falling back on his military training. They needed information, options, and a plan. "Tommy, how long do we have?" The teenager consulted his watch and the position of the sun. "At their current pace, maybe 72 hours. But Marcus, that's not the worst part." He paused, swallowing hard. "They're not just wandering. They stopped twice while I was watching them, and I swear they were waiting for stragglers to catch up. It's like they're being led." Jake wiped his hands on a greasy rag, his usual cheerfulness replaced by grim determination. "Well then, we'd better get ready to welcome them properly. The Beast can carry 20 people, and I've got enough fuel for maybe 300 miles. The weight of leadership settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders as he looked around at the faces of the people who'd come to depend on him. There were families here, children who'd never known the world before the outbreak, elderly survivors who'd found peace in Haven Ridge after losing everything. "Gather everyone in the main hall," he announced. "It's time we talked about options." As the survivors began filing toward their meeting place, Marcus caught Elena's arm. "How long would you need to complete your research?" She looked back at her laboratory at 2 years of painstaking work. "Weeks, maybe months. Marcus, if I'm right about this, if I can crack the virus's code, we might not have to run anymore." The sound of distant moaning carried on the wind, still faint but unmistakable. Time was running out, and Marcus knew that the next 72 hours would determine whether humanity's last stand at Haven Ridge would become their greatest victory or their final grave. Chat controls Sonnet 4. The main hall buzzed with nervous energy as the 47 survivors of Haven Ridge gathered in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps and candles. Marcus stood at the center, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the group that had become his responsibility and his family. Children clung to their parents while teenagers tried to mask their fear with bravado, and the elderly sat quietly, having already survived too many crises to show panic outwardly. "We all know why we're here," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that had kept them alive for 2 years. "Tommy's scouting report confirms what Rebecca's been hearing on the radio. We're facing the largest zombie horde anyone has encountered since the early days of the outbreak." Dr. Elena Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her laptop clutched protectively against her chest. Inside that computer lay 2 years of painstaking research, genetic sequences, viral analysis, and what she believed might be the key to humanity's salvation. She caught Marcus's eye and gave a slight nod, knowing what she had to reveal would change everything. "Before we discuss our options," Elena said, standing slowly, "there's something I need to tell you all. Something I've been working on in secret because I didn't want to give anyone false hope." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of their generator and the occasional crack of settling wood. Jake Morrison leaned forward in his chair, grease still staining his fingernails from his morning work on their vehicles. Rebecca Walsh's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm, a habit she developed whenever unexpected revelations arose. "I've been developing what I believe could be a cure for the zombie virus," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "Not just a treatment or a vaccine, but an actual reversal agent that could potentially restore cognitive function to the infected." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Voices erupted throughout the hall, some filled with hope, others with skepticism and anger. Mary Patterson, a nurse who'd lost her husband in the early days, stood up shakily. "You mean to tell us there might be a cure and you've kept it secret?" Tommy Garcia, still exhausted from his morning reconnaissance, felt a surge of conflicting emotions. His sister had been among the first to fall to the virus, and the possibility that she might somehow be saved was almost too much to bear. But Elena held up her hands, her expression grave. "It's not ready. I need more time, more resources, and most importantly, more test subjects. But the preliminary results suggest that if we can isolate the original viral strain and introduce a modified bacteriophage, we might be able to reverse the neural damage." Marcus felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him like a physical force. Every decision he made affected not just his own survival, but the lives of everyone in this room. "How much more time?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't align with their current crisis. "Months at minimum. Maybe as long as a year." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the concrete floor. "We don't have months. We don't even have weeks. Tommy's report says the horde will be here in 3 days, and I've been tracking their movement on satellite imagery." She pulled out a tablet displaying grainy overhead shots. "They're not slowing down and they're not deviating from their path. Whatever's driving them knows exactly where we are." Jake stood up next, his mechanical mind already calculating logistics. "I've been doing inventory on our vehicles and supplies. The beast can carry 20 people comfortably, maybe 25 if we pack tight. My pickup truck can handle another 8, and Rebecca's patrol car can take 4 more. That's 37 people out of 47. The mathematics of survival hit everyone simultaneously. Someone would have to stay behind, or they'd have to find another solution." Old Pete Wilson, a former construction foreman who'd helped build Haven Ridge's defenses, struggled to his feet. "I've lived through wars, depressions, and now the end of the world. I'm 73 years old, and I'm not about to take a seat that could save a child." His granddaughter Amy grabbed his arm fiercely. "Nobody's staying behind, Grandpa. We'll figure something else out." But the harsh reality of their situation was becoming clear. They could run and save most of their group, abandoning 2 years of work in Elena's research. They could stay and fight, likely facing complete annihilation against impossible odds. Or they could try to find a third option that nobody had thought of yet. Marcus looked around the room at faces that had become dear to him. Mrs. Patterson's teenage son Danny, who'd learned to be brave despite losing his father. The Johnson twins, barely 8 years old, who'd never known safety anywhere but Haven Ridge. Frank Miller, whose carpentry skills had helped build their walls. Each face represented a choice, a calculation, a moral weight that threatened to crush him. "We need to vote," Marcus announced finally. "Those in favor of evacuation, raise your hands." 12 hands went up immediately. "Those in favor of staying and fighting?" 15 hands rose, including Elena's, which surprised everyone. The remaining 20 people sat in conflicted silence, unable to choose between abandoning their home and facing certain death. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint but unmistakable sound of distant moaning, still miles away but growing closer with each passing hour. Chat controls Sonnet 4. The emergency meeting had dissolved into smaller groups scattered throughout Haven Ridge, each debating their impossible choice in hushed, urgent whispers. Marcus found himself walking the perimeter alone, checking defensive positions that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate against a horde of 10,000 zombies. The walls they'd built with such pride now looked like children's toys, barely 8 feet high and constructed from salvaged materials that wouldn't stop a determined human, let alone thousands of infected. Rebecca joined him at the eastern watchtower, her police training evident in how she automatically scanned the horizon for movement. "The satellite imagery updated an hour ago," she said quietly, handing him the tablet. "They're moving faster than Tommy estimated. At this rate, we have maybe 36 hours, not 72. Marcus studied the grainy black and white images, noting how the dark mass of the horde seemed to flow across the landscape like spilled oil. "Have you seen anything like this coordination before?" Rebecca shook her head grimly. "Never. In the early days we dealt with scattered groups, maybe a few hundred at most. This looks almost—" She paused, searching for the right word, "military." Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked feverishly in her laboratory, surrounded by 2 years' worth of research that might hold humanity's salvation. Her latest batch of samples showed promising results, but she needed living infected subjects to test her theories. The virus samples she'd been studying were from the early outbreak, and if the zombies were truly evolving as everyone suspected, her cure might already be obsolete. She jumped when Tommy Garcia appeared in her doorway, his young face drawn with exhaustion and something else she couldn't identify. "Doc, I need to tell you something," Tommy said, glancing around nervously. "Something I didn't mention in the meeting." Elena looked up from her microscope, noting the tremor in the teenager's voice. "What is it?" Tommy pulled out a small digital camera, his hands shaking as he scrolled through the images. "When I was watching the horde from the cell tower, I took pictures. Look at this one." The image showed the leading edge of the zombie mass, but what caught Elena's attention wasn't the sheer number of infected. It was their formation. The zombies weren't simply shambling forward in a chaotic mob. They were organized into rough columns, with what appeared to be different types of infected serving different functions. Some moved ahead as scouts, others formed the bulk of the advancing force, and still others brought up the rear, almost like a military unit. "This is impossible," Elena whispered, zooming in on the image. "The virus destroys higher cognitive functions. They shouldn't be capable of this level of organization." Tommy scrolled to the next image and Elena's blood ran cold. At the center of the horde, surrounded by a protective circle of zombies, was something that didn't look entirely human anymore. It was taller than the others, its limbs elongated and its movements too fluid, too purposeful. But most disturbing of all were its eyes, which seemed to be looking directly at the camera with an intelligence that should have been impossible. "There's more," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think it saw me. When I took that picture, it stopped and turned toward the tower. The whole horde stopped with it like they were waiting for orders." Across the settlement, Jake Morrison was conducting his own investigation in the motor pool. The mechanic had always been good with his hands, but lately he'd been noticing things that didn't make sense. Tools moved when he wasn't looking, engine parts disappeared and reappeared in different locations, and his carefully organized workshop seemed to rearrange itself overnight. Tonight he'd decided to find out why. Hidden among the spare parts and scrap metal, Jake discovered something that made his heart race. It was a weapons cache, military-grade equipment hidden behind false panels he'd never noticed before. M4 carbines, ammunition, grenades, and something that looked like a radio transmitter, all bearing fresh military markings that meant they'd been placed there recently. His hands trembled as he examined a note attached to one of the weapons. "For emergencies only, authorization code, Blackbird 7. Jake had never heard of any Blackbird protocol, and he'd certainly never authorized anyone to hide weapons in his workshop. But as he studied the equipment more closely, he realized someone had been using the radio transmitter. The frequency was set to a military channel, and according to the log, transmissions had been sent as recently as yesterday. Someone in Haven Ridge was communicating with the outside world, and they'd been doing it in secret. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If someone was secretly transmitting their location, it might explain how the Horde knew exactly where to find them. Jake's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Was there a traitor among them or something even worse? As midnight approached, Elena made a breakthrough that changed everything. The blood samples she'd been analyzing weren't just from early outbreak victims as she'd believed. Mixed in with the old samples were fresh ones, recently infected, and the viral load was completely different. This new strain was more complex, more adaptable, and most terrifyingly, it seemed designed to preserve certain brain functions while destroying others. The zombies weren't just evolving randomly, they were being guided by something that understood the virus at a genetic level. Her computer chimed with an incoming message on a frequency she'd thought was dead. The text was simple but chilling. Dr. Rodriguez, your research has been most illuminating. We look forward to meeting you in person. Signed, the architect. Elena's scream shattered the midnight silence, bringing Marcus and the others running. But by the time they reached her laboratory she was gone, and the only evidence of her disappearance was an overturned chair and a single word written in her own blood on the laboratory wall. Run. Chat control Sonnet 4. The discovery of Elena's disappearance sent shockwaves through Haven Ridge that made the approaching horde seem almost secondary. Marcus stood in the abandoned laboratory, staring at the blood-red warning scrawled on the wall while his mind raced through the implications. If Elena had been taken by someone who knew about her research, then their enemy was far more sophisticated than a simple zombie horde. Rebecca burst into the lab, her service weapon drawn and her eyes scanning every shadow. The perimeter guards report no breaches, no signs of forced entry. Whoever took her either had inside help or knew exactly how to get in and out undetected. Jake arrived moments later, his face pale with the weight of his own discovery. Marcus, we need to talk. All of us. Right now. He led them to the motor pool where he revealed the hidden weapons cache, the secret radio transmitter, and the logs showing recent transmissions. Someone's been feeding information to the outside for weeks, maybe months. Our patrol schedules, our defenses, our population count, everything. Tommy studied the radio equipment with growing dread. The frequency settings match some of the military chatter Rebecca's been monitoring. But if they've been watching us this whole time, why wait until now to strike? Rebecca's police instincts kicked in as she examined the evidence. Because they were waiting for something specific. Elena's research. Think about it, a cure for the zombie virus would be worth more than any settlement or cache of supplies. It would be worth everything. The realization hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. They weren't just facing a zombie horde, they were caught in the middle of something much larger and more dangerous. But with Elena gone and the horde less than 24 hours away, they had to make a choice. Stay and fight a battle they couldn't win, or attempt the most dangerous evacuation in the history of Haven Ridge. We implement Gauntlet Run, Marcus announced, using the code name they developed for their worst-case evacuation scenario. Jake, how long to get all vehicles ready for a breakthrough attempt? Jake wiped grease from his hands, his mind already calculating fuel loads and passenger capacity. Give me 4 hours to armor plate the school bus and reinforce the beast's ram. But Marcus, even with the hidden weapons, we're talking about punching through 10,000 zombies with vehicles that weren't designed for warfare. Rebecca spread out hand-drawn maps of the surrounding terrain. The original plan called for a northern route toward the rumored safe zone, but if that's compromised, we need alternatives. There's an old mining road that leads west through the mountains. It's rough, but it might be our only option if the main highways are blocked. Old Pete Wilson shuffled into the motor pool, his granddaughter Amy close behind him. Despite his age, Pete's construction experience had proven invaluable in building Haven Ridge's defenses. I've been thinking about our demolition supplies, he said slowly. We've got enough explosives to bring down sections of the mountain road behind us. It won't stop the horde, but it might buy us time. Amy clutched her grandfather's arm, her young face set with determination that reminded Marcus of Elena's fierce dedication to her research. Grandpa's right about the explosives, but we need someone to stay behind and trigger them at exactly the right moment. Someone who knows the timing and can make sure everyone else gets clear. The group fell silent as the implications sank in. Pete nodded gravely. I've lived my life and I've seen more than any man should have to see. If staying behind means the rest of you have a chance, then that's what needs to happen. Nobody's staying behind, Marcus said firmly, but even as he spoke, he knew that successful evacuations often required impossible sacrifices. Tommy had been unusually quiet during the planning session, but now he stepped forward with something clutched in his trembling hands. There's something else. Something I found in Elena's lab after she disappeared. He held up a small device that looked like a modified GPS unit. She left this hidden under her desk. It's been tracking something and according to the display, it's moving toward us fast. Rebecca examined the device, her expression growing more alarmed by the second. This isn't tracking the main horde. This is tracking something else, something smaller but moving much faster. Whatever it is, it'll reach us in about 6 hours. Jake studied the readout and felt his heart sink. 6 hours? That changes everything. We can't wait for dawn to begin the evacuation. We'll have to run the gauntlet in complete darkness. The plan that emerged was desperate and dangerous. They would use the school bus to carry the children and elderly, with Jake driving the beast as a ram to break through the zombie lines. Rebecca would lead a smaller group in the patrol cars to provide covering fire and rescue anyone who got separated. Tommy would use his scouting skills to guide them through the safest route, while Pete would handle the explosives to cover their escape. But as they made final preparations, loading supplies and saying quiet goodbyes to the place that had been their home, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Elena's disappearance, the organized horde, the secret transmissions, everything pointed to an enemy that had been planning this moment for a long time. The sound of engines starting broke the pre-dawn silence as Haven Ridge's survivors prepared for their most desperate gamble. In the distance, the first zombie scouts appeared on the eastern ridge, their inhuman moans carried by the wind like a promise of death. Marcus took one last look at the settlement they'd built with their own hands, knowing that in a few hours, it would either be their salvation or their tomb. Chat controls Sonnet 4. The gauntlet run began at 4:47 a.m. under a moonless sky that offered both concealment and terror. Jake's armored beast led the convoy, its reinforced ram gleaming dully in the headlights as it approached the first wave of zombies that had begun surrounding Haven Ridge during the night. The school bus followed closely behind, packed with 23 survivors including all the children, while Rebecca's patrol cars brought up the rear with the remaining fighters. Tommy rode shotgun with Jake, using night vision binoculars to navigate through the scattered infected that seemed to appear from nowhere. The plan had been simple: punch through the zombie perimeter, reach the mountain highway and drive hard toward the western mining roads. But as the beast's ram connected with the first cluster of zombies, Tommy realized something was horribly wrong. "Jake, they're not acting right," he shouted over the engine noise and the sickening thuds of impact. "They're trying to separate us, not just attack." Jake fought to keep control as zombies threw themselves under the wheels, seeming more intent on disabling the vehicles than feeding. Through his rearview mirror, he watched in horror as a coordinated group of infected managed to flip one of Rebecca's patrol cars, sending it rolling into a ditch. The survivors inside scrambled out, but they were immediately cut off from the main convoy by a wall of zombies that appeared with military precision. Rebecca's voice crackled over the radio. "Convoy 1, we've lost patrol car 2. Martinez and his family are on foot, surrounded. We need to go back for them." Marcus, riding in the school bus with the children, felt the weight of command crushing down on him. Every instinct screamed to save Martinez and his family, but turning back would put 23 other lives at risk. "Negative, Rebecca. We stick to the plan. Get to the rally point." But the convoy's troubles were just beginning. As they crested a hill on the mountain highway, Jake slammed on the brakes so hard that the school bus nearly rear-ended the beast. Stretched across the road ahead was a barricade of abandoned vehicles, and moving among them were zombies that moved with purpose and intelligence. These weren't the shambling infected they'd grown accustomed to, these were something new, something evolved. Tommy adjusted his night vision and felt his blood freeze. "Jake, these zombies are using tools. They're working together to build that barricade." The creatures ahead weren't randomly placed abandoned cars. They were deliberately positioned tank traps, and the zombies manning them carried crude weapons and seemed to be communicating through a series of guttural sounds that almost resembled language. Jake threw the beast into reverse, but it was too late. More barricades had appeared behind them, and zombies began emerging from the forest on both sides of the road. The convoy was trapped in a carefully orchestrated ambush. "This is Convoy 1 to Haven Ridge Base," Marcus radioed to Pete Wilson, who had stayed behind to monitor their escape. "We're pinned down on Highway 23. Repeat, we are trapped and need immediate assistance." Pete's voice came back scratchy but determined. "Copy that, Convoy 1. Initiating Prometheus Protocol in 10 minutes. Get to cover and stay down." Prometheus Protocol was their code name for the explosive charges Pete had placed throughout Haven Ridge. The old man planned to bring down half the mountain to block the zombie horde's advance, but the explosion would be massive enough to trigger avalanches for miles around. With no choice but to abandon their vehicles, The survivors grabbed what supplies they could carry and fled into an abandoned shopping mall just off the highway. The mall had been empty since the early days of the outbreak, its stores gutted and its corridors dark, but it offered the only shelter within running distance. Marcus led the group through the shattered glass doors, immediately noticing that the mall felt wrong somehow. It was too clean, too organized for a building that had been abandoned for 2 years. Rebecca's tactical training kicked in as she noticed fresh footprints in the dust and recently disturbed debris. "We're not alone in here," she whispered, raising her weapon. From the darkness of what had once been a department store, a voice called out, "Lower your weapons. We're not infected." An elderly man emerged with his hands raised, followed by a teenage girl who looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in months. "Name's Frank Miller, and this is my granddaughter Amy. We've been living here since the beginning." Frank's eyes were sharp despite his age, and Marcus noticed he carried himself like someone with military training. "Living here? For 2 years." Amy nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa made this place safe. We have supplies, weapons, everything we need. But lately things have been changing. The zombies outside aren't like the old ones." Frank's expression darkened. 3 days ago they started working together. Building things, planning attacks. And yesterday something came through here that wasn't quite human anymore. Tall, intelligent, speaking in a voice that sounded almost normal. It was looking for someone, asking about a doctor. Tommy felt sick as he realized what Frank was describing. Was it looking for Dr. Elena Rodriguez? Frank nodded grimly. That's the name it kept repeating. Said it had important work to finish and needed her expertise. Then it left, but not before telling the zombies outside to wait for more survivors to arrive. As if summoned by their conversation, a sound echoed through the mall that made everyone's blood run cold. It was the distinct rumble of the beast's engine, but Jake and his group were inside the mall with them. Someone else was driving their armored vehicle, and from the coordinated zombie movements visible through the mall skylights, that someone was leading the infected in a final assault on the trapped survivors. Chat controls Sonnet 4. Frank Miller moved with surprising agility for a man in his 70s, leading the group through a maze of service corridors that he and Amy had mapped over 2 years of surviving in the abandoned mall. The sound of the beast's engine grew louder as it circled the building, accompanied by the methodical pounding of what sounded like hundreds of zombie fists against the reinforced entrance doors. "The main entrances won't hold for long," Frank explained as they hurried through the dim passages lit only by battery-powered lanterns. "But Amy and I have learned a few tricks about staying invisible." Amy moved ahead of the group with the silent grace of someone who'd spent years avoiding detection. At 16, she'd become an expert at reading zombie behavior patterns, and what she was seeing through the mall security monitors terrified her. "Grandpa, they're not trying to break in randomly. They're testing different entry points, probing for weaknesses. It's like they're following a plan." Rebecca studied the security feeds over Amy's shoulder, her police training recognizing tactical assault patterns. "This isn't zombie behavior. Someone's coordinating them, giving them specific instructions." Through the crackling speakers of an old mall intercom system, a voice suddenly echoed through the corridors. It was human, but distorted in a way that made everyone's skin crawl. "Survivors of Haven Ridge, you've caused considerable inconvenience to our research schedule. Dr. Rodriguez was quite cooperative once she understood the importance of our work, but we still require additional test subjects." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. Elena was alive, but she was being used by whoever was behind the zombie evolution. "Who are you?" he shouted into the echoing mall. "What do you want?" The voice that responded carried an odd mixture of human intellect and something fundamentally alien. "You may call me the architect." Dr. Rodriguez's research was impressive, but incomplete. She was attempting to cure the virus when she should have been perfecting it. Humanity's next evolutionary step requires guided development, not random mutation. Jake worked frantically with the mall's old electrical systems, trying to restore power to sections that Frank had kept dark to avoid attracting attention. "If I can get the escalators running and some of the store security gates operational, we might be able to create choke points and slow them down." Tommy had been studying the mall's layout, comparing it to his mental map of zombie behavior patterns from his scouting missions. "Frank, you said the zombies have been changing. How exactly?" Frank's weathered face grew grim as he remembered the past few days. "At first they just wandered through like they always do. But then they started leaving things behind, tools, weapons, even food. Like they were preparing for something. And yesterday before that creature came through, I saw them building structures outside. Not random piles of debris, but actual defensive positions. Amy pulled up footage from their hidden exterior cameras, showing images that made everyone's blood run cold. The zombies hadn't just been building random structures, they'd constructed a sophisticated siege network around the mall, complete with elevated positions for spotters and what looked like primitive catapults made from shopping carts and elastic cables. They've been planning this for days, Rebecca realized. Elena's disappearance, the horde's approach to Haven Ridge, everything's been coordinated. The architect's voice returned over the intercom, this time with an edge of impatience. Dr. Rodriguez has shared fascinating details about your community's defensive capabilities and individual psychological profiles. She was particularly informative about the young scout's tendency toward heroic sacrifice and the mechanic's protective instincts regarding vehicles. Tommy felt sick as he realized what that meant. They know how we think, how we'll react. Elena didn't just tell them about her research, she told them about us. Frank moved to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a cache of weapons and supplies that put Jake's discovery at Haven Ridge to shame. Military-grade rifles, explosives, communication equipment, and medical supplies were neatly organized in what looked like a professional armory. I wasn't always a grandfather hiding in an abandoned mall, Frank said quietly. 30 years with Army Special Forces teaches you a few things about preparation and patience. Amy handed out weapons to those who could use them, her movements efficient and practiced. Grandpa's been training me since we got here. He always said someday we'd have to fight for more than just our own survival. But as they prepared their defenses, Frank made an announcement that stunned everyone. There's something else you need to know. I've been monitoring military frequencies for 2 years, and I know about the government facilities that are still operational. The safe zone you were trying to reach? It's not what you think it is. Rebecca looked up from checking her ammunition. What do you mean? Frank's expression was grave as he pulled out a military radio and tuned it to a specific frequency. The transmission that came through was crystal clear, and the voice was unmistakably human and military in nature. Phoenix Base to Research Station Alpha. Confirmed delivery of Test Group 7. Dr. Rodriguez's cooperation has exceeded expectations. Recommend proceeding to Phase 3 of Project Renaissance immediately. Marcus felt the world spinning around him as the implications hit. The government. They're behind this. The zombie virus, the evolution, everything. Frank nodded grimly. And now they're using us as test subjects to perfect their biological weapon. The question is, do we die fighting the zombies outside or do we find a way to take the fight to the real enemy? Chat Control Sonnet 4. The military radio in Frank's hands continued transmitting information that shattered everything the survivors thought they knew about their world. Marcus listened in growing horror as coded references to test populations, controlled exposure rates, and behavioral modification protocols painted a picture of systematic human experimentation on a massive scale. The zombie apocalypse hadn't been an accident or a natural outbreak, it had been a deliberate depopulation program disguised as a pandemic. Amy worked at a laptop computer she'd salvaged from the mall's electronics store, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed encrypted files that Frank had been collecting for months. Grandpa, look at this. Project Renaissance has been running for over 3 years, not 2. They were testing the virus in isolated communities long before the official outbreak began. The screen displayed a map dotted with red markers indicating test sites across the country. Haven Ridge appeared on the list as Test Site Gamma 7, along with dozens of other settlements that the survivors had assumed were simply unlucky communities that fell to random zombie attacks. Rebecca studied the data with her investigative instincts, noting patterns that made her sick. They've been documenting everything. Population demographics, survival rates, psychological breakdowns, even individual responses to stress. We're not survivors to them, we're data points. Jake had been unusually quiet while working on the mall's security systems, but now he looked up with a grim expression. I recognize some of these facility codes. Before the outbreak, I did contract work for a company that built agricultural research stations in remote areas. Except they weren't studying crops, they were building containment facilities. Tommy studied satellite images on Amy's computer, his scouting experience helping him identify features that others might miss. Frank, these coordinates here, this is less than 50 miles from Haven Ridge. It's marked as Research Station Alpha, in the transmission you intercepted. Frank examined the coordinates and felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. That's where they took Elena. And if the transmission is accurate, that's where they're conducting the final phase of their experiment. The architect's voice returned over the intercom, but this time it carried a tone of satisfaction rather than menace. You're learning faster than expected. Dr. Rodriguez estimated it would take you several more hours to piece together the truth. She also predicted that you would attempt to reach our facility in a misguided rescue attempt. Marcus gripped his rifle tighter, feeling the weight of leadership and the burden of choice. What makes you so sure we'll do what you expect? The response came with what almost sounded like electronic laughter. Because Dr. Rodriguez provided us with detailed psychological profiles of each survivor. Marcus Thompson, career military, prone to protective instincts and self-sacrifice for the unit. Rebecca Walsh, law enforcement background, obsessed with justice and bringing criminals to accountability. Jacob Morrison, working-class mechanic, values loyalty above personal safety. Amy looked up from her computer with wide eyes. He's not just reading Elena's notes. He's accessing them in real time. She's here, somewhere in the mall, transmitting information directly to him. Frank immediately began checking their security monitors more carefully, looking for anything they might have missed. If Elena's here, she's either being coerced or... He stopped, unwilling to voice the possibility that Elena might be cooperating willingly. Tommy had been studying the zombie movement patterns outside, and he noticed something that made his heart race. The zombies aren't just surrounding us anymore. They're pulling back, creating a clear corridor leading north. Toward those coordinates. Rebecca understood immediately. They're hurting us. The whole siege is designed to push us in a specific direction. Jake worked frantically to restore more of the mall's electrical systems, hoping to find security footage that might reveal Elena's location. What he found instead was far worse. Cameras showing Elena in what appeared to be a mobile laboratory set up in the mall's old anchor store, working alongside figures in military uniforms and hazmat suits. She appeared uninjured but was clearly under duress, her movements mechanical and her expression vacant. They've got her drugged or brainwashed, Jake said, his voice tight with anger. But she's here, less than 300 yards away. Frank studied the security footage with a tactical eye. The laboratory is heavily guarded, but it's also isolated. If we could reach her, we might be able to reverse whatever they've done and get the real information about stopping this nightmare. Amy discovered something else in the encrypted files that changed everything. Grandpa, according to this, Project Renaissance isn't just about creating better biological weapons. They're preparing for something called the Reset, a complete reorganization of human civilization with a drastically reduced population under direct government control. The architect's voice interrupted their planning one final time. You have 30 minutes to reach the laboratory and witness Dr. Rodriguez's final contribution to human evolution. After that, the mall will be sealed and sterilized to eliminate any remaining test subjects. Choose wisely, rescue your friend and learn the truth, or remain hiding and die knowing nothing. Outside, the zombies had formed perfect military ranks, creating a corridor that led directly toward the anchor store where Elena was being held. It was obviously a trap, but it was also their only chance to save her and potentially stop Project Renaissance. Marcus looked around at the faces of his fellow survivors, seeing determination mixed with fear, and made the decision that would determine humanity's future. We go in. All of us. Because if we're going to die fighting for something that matters. Chat controls Sonnet 4. The assault on the makeshift laboratory began at 6:15 a.m. as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the mall's broken skylights, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the movement of the coordinated zombie forces. Frank led the tactical advance with the precision of his special forces training, while Amy provided cover fire from elevated positions she'd scouted during their 2 years in the mall. The corridor of zombies remained eerily motionless as the survivors moved forward, creating an atmosphere more terrifying than any chaotic attack they'd previously faced. Marcus coordinated the assault using hand signals, directing Jake and Tommy to flank the laboratory's defensive positions while Rebecca moved to secure their escape route. But as they approached the anchor store, it became clear that the architect had anticipated every aspect of their strategy. The laboratory wasn't just a mobile research station. It was a sophisticated command center filled with monitors displaying real-time data from dozens of test sites across the country. Elena stood at the center of it all, her movements mechanical as she worked at computer terminals under the watchful eyes of figures in military hazmat suits. When she looked up and saw Marcus approaching, her eyes showed a flicker of recognition beneath the chemical haze that clouded her thoughts. "Marcus," she said in a voice that sounded like her own but carried an odd, distant quality. "You shouldn't have come. The research is too important to interrupt." The architect emerged from behind a bank of computers, and for the first time the survivors saw their enemy face to face. It had once been human, but the virus had changed it in ways that preserved intelligence while enhancing physical capabilities. Its elongated limbs moved with fluid grace, and its eyes held an intelligence that was both human and utterly alien. Dr. Rodriguez has been most cooperative, the architect said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed designed to unsettle human hearing. Her research into viral reversal has provided us with the final component needed for controlled evolution. Humanity's future no longer needs to include random mutations or chaotic transformations. Jake worked frantically at a computer terminal, his mechanical skills translating surprisingly well to electronic systems. Elena, whatever they've given you, fight it. Your real research, the cure you were working on, where is it? Elena's drugged mind struggled to focus, but somewhere beneath the chemical fog, her scientific determination still burned. Computer, Terminal 7, password is Tommy's birthday. Her voice trailed off as the drugs reasserted their control, but Jake had heard enough. Terminal 7 contained not just Elena's original cure research, but also detailed schematics of every Project Renaissance facility in the country, along with communication protocols that could broadcast a cure formula to any remaining government installations. Rebecca engaged the hazmat-suited guards while Frank and Amy worked to create an extraction path through the zombie corridors. But the architect had one final revelation that threatened to break the survivors' resolve completely. "You believe you're fighting for humanity's survival," it said, its distorted voice carrying an edge of satisfaction. But Project Renaissance was never about extermination. It was about selection. Every survivor in every test site was chosen for specific genetic and psychological traits. You're not the last of humanity, you're the prototype for the next version. Tommy felt sick as the implications hit him. You mean we were never really survivors? We were bred for this. The architect's expression might have been a smile on a human face. Dr. Rodriguez's psychological profiles confirmed what our genetic analysis had already suggested. Each of you represents an ideal combination of traits needed for humanity's guided evolution. Your children will be the foundation of a species designed for perfect cooperation with controlled viral enhancement. But Elena, fighting through the drugs with sheer determination, managed to activate a hidden program she'd embedded in the laboratory's systems. Alarms began blaring as her real research, not the perverted version the architect had been using, but her original cure formula, began broadcasting on every emergency frequency across the nation. "The cure," she gasped, her voice stronger as adrenaline fought the chemical restraints. "It's not just a reversal agent. It's a complete system reset that will break the viral control mechanisms and restore free will to anyone infected." The architect realized what was happening and moved to stop the transmission, but Frank and his team had reached the laboratory's core. In a final act of defiance that drew on 30 years of military service, Frank detonated charges he'd been carrying since Haven Ridge, not to destroy the facility, but to ensure the broadcast continued uninterrupted. The explosion shattered the architect's control systems and sent Elena's cure formula racing across communication networks to every surviving settlement, government facility, and military installation still operational. As the laboratory collapsed around them, Marcus made the hardest decision of his life, using his body to shield Elena and the computer terminals long enough for the complete transmission to finish. The cure began taking effect immediately on the controlled zombies outside, their mechanical movements giving way to confusion and then to the first stirrings of restored human consciousness. In the aftermath, as survivors across the country began implementing Elena's cure and dismantling the remaining Project Renaissance facilities, a new dawn truly began. The cost had been enormous, Marcus didn't survive his final sacrifice, and Frank's injuries from the explosion proved fatal despite Amy's desperate attempts to save him. But Elena's cure worked, not just reversing the zombie virus but breaking the psychological control mechanisms that had turned humans into unwitting test subjects. Tommy, now one of the senior survivors, stood on the ruins of the mall as freed humans emerged from years of viral slavery, blinking in sunlight they thought they'd never see again. The government facilities fell one by one as their own personnel, freed from chemical and viral control, turned against their handlers. Humanity had survived its darkest hour, not through violence or domination, but through the courage of ordinary people who refused to accept that their species' future should be decided by others. The new world that emerged would be built on the memory of those who'd paid the ultimate price to ensure that freedom, not control, would define humanity's next chapter. Chat Control Sonnet 4.